So again, welcome everyone. My name is Caroline Wedderburn, the Assistant Director of Admissions. On behalf of the admissions team at Fielding Graduate University, I want to extend a very warm welcome to each of you. We're thrilled to have you join us for today's session. And as you embark on your journey to explore the unique and transformative opportunities that we offer here at Fielding, we hope this event helps you connect with the valuable insights and expertise that will shape your academic and professional growth. We're going to be recording the session to share with all of you, as well as those who couldn't attend live. So feel free to take notes, but we'll be sharing the recording probably tomorrow after the session and everything is ready. With that said, it is my pleasure to turn things over to our program director, Dr. Patrice Rosenthal, who will provide a quick introduction to today's session.
Caroline, thank you so much. And thank you all for being here. Thank you for joining us. Lovely to see you. We appreciate your interest in the HOD program, Human and Organization Development, and in Fielding Graduate University. I am Patrice Rosenthal, and my role in Fielding is as department chair. So I am the program director for 2 PhD degrees. There may be some in this gathering, in this room, interested in the PhD in human development. Others, perhaps the PhD in organization development and change. And there may be some in the room interested in a range of other degrees. I am the program director for the HD and the ODC degrees. Those are 2 separate curricular paths, but we call our program Human and Organization Development. We call it HOD because we operate as a common program and faculty work across that boundary with students and with alums. And I am here with a range of excellent colleagues. So I want to get us started on this, a topic conversation. We wanted to share with you a presentation and an informal conversation about the types of topics and issues and interests that are percolating, that are cooking in the HOD program. And so just a very, very quick topic introduction, and then I'm going to hand it over to a couple of my excellent colleagues. Many of you will be familiar with the term VUCA, that we live in a VUCA world. We live in a world that is volatile, that is uncertain, that's characterized by complexity, that's characterized by ambiguity. We are living the VUCA life. I think most would agree that there is a lot of that around. And that gives rise to huge and particular types of challenges to leaders, to consultants, to workers, to scholars of all kinds who are interested in creating and sustaining healthy and effective organizations. So that, as a broad topic, is what we want to discuss with you today, discuss with each other and discuss with you. Again, giving you a kind of flavor of the types of conversations that are extant in Fielding. And so I want to hand over now to a very important and particular colleague of mine. Professor Katrina Rogers is a faculty member in the HOD program. She's also President Emerita of Fielding Graduate University. And so until quite recently, she was president of this organization, leader in this organization, and in many, many ways will remain so. So Katrina has long championed scholarship that is socially responsible and learning that is transformational at individual, group, and also organization level. And again, that is emblematic of Fielding as an institution and the HOD program in particular. Katrina has had a distinguished career in higher education, in international development, and a range of other contexts. And she brings to us and to this conversation today deep insight in leadership, in sustainability, and in global engagement. She's going to present us with a few slides just to generate a conversation, and then we'll see where we go. And in this, she's going to be partnered by another wonderful colleague of mine, Dr. Marie Sonnet, who is an alumna of the HOD program and whose strong dissertation looked at issues around organization resilience. And so with that, Katrina, please.
Thank you so much, Patrice. I'm just calling up the slideshow, and welcome everyone. It's a pleasure to meet you virtually. I just want to double check, Patrice, nod if you can see my slideshow. Excellent, good. And I want to welcome you virtually to this time together. Part of what I would like to do today is to provide just a little snapshot into the kinds of conversations that we engage in at Fielding. And it's in recognition of the work that we do, this puzzle around the intersection between human and organization development, which sparks for many people who decide they want to go on to advanced graduate education. They have big questions they want to consider. And many of you are here in this room for that very reason, that there are ideas you have, there's scholarship you want to have access to, there's your own learning, you want to become a scholar, practitioner, a researcher. You want to understand the theory behind the ways that organizations work. And at the outset, I just want to say that organizations, I'm using that term really loosely. Before I came to Fielding, and thank you, Patrice, for acknowledging the long range of activity I've done at Fielding, I also worked in other organizations. I worked for nonprofits, I worked for universities, I had a government role at one point. So I've had a wide range of experience. And I see organizations at a particular level. So I think a lot of the concepts that you'll encounter at Fielding as part of graduate work actually apply at many levels: society, organizations, systems, family. And for those of you, for instance, who may be consultants or work in education, you could actually use the word system and it be almost interchangeable with the kinds of concepts that we're talking about today. So this is just a snapshot, a glimpse, a taste of Fielding, if you will. And I hope that what I present today will spark a conversation. And if not a conversation today, something that you'll carry with you throughout the week and over the course of time, and you'll be thinking about that. And I just want to acknowledge Marie. Thank you for being here. It's always a delight to work with you as a student colleague and now to work with you as an alum colleague. So you have to bear with me for just a moment while I get my PowerPoint going. So one of the questions I want to say to you, and I don't know if you can see everything that I can see, is that this slide talks about what are some of the common terms that we use to describe effective organizations. If we were in a seminar together on a Zoom call, I would ask you to throw out terms. And you're welcome to do so in the chat if you'd like. But you can probably come to mind if you took your pen and paper or you typed it in or you thought about it, you could come with lots of different terms for how we describe effective organizations. Well, obviously, one is success, how we define success. Another is financially sound. Another concept is has longevity. You think of organizations that have been around a long time, that in itself seems to prove its own success. That they're easy to work with. Think of organizations you've worked with or that you've been consultant to, or even in your own businesses. If they're easy to work with, that seems to be an important indicator of an effective organization. Get stuff done is another way that we might say that colloquially, that organizations, you can feel that energy when you're in an organization where things seem to be working, right? You solve problems, you take apart complex things, you put them back together, you solve, you move, you keep moving that organization forward. There's an excitement to that. And that processes make sense to the employees. So this is not an exhaustive list, but this is just an idea of how do you describe effective organizations? If all these things happen, you have happy employees, you all hold up stars, and you go home. So that's one way to think about effectiveness. But how do we measure it? Well, many of you have a lot of experience. One of the things that I appreciate about Fielding student colleagues is the level of experience that you bring to your advanced training, whether it's doctoral work or master's work. Most of you are interested in doctoral work at this point in your careers and in your professional lives and in your personal life. So you've encountered lots of different frameworks. So none of these will be a particular surprise. Things like you measure engagement and satisfaction. You look at your turnover and you analyze it. You look at your morale. These are ways that you measure. If you're higher on these scales, employees are happier. It implies that your organization must be more effective. You conduct exit interviews, right? You measure your growth, financial growth, maybe growth across geographies, whatever that is, whatever those metrics are for your particular organization. You do performance reviews of your employees. All of these are just a very small sample size. Again, if we were doing a larger seminar, we dig into this more. But the idea is to give you this framework for how do we think about what's effective organizations. That's this part. That's the transactional part of organizational life. How do we describe effectiveness? How do we measure effectiveness? Okay, and for many organizations of any type across any sector, that's about where it ends. But I suggest that there may be more. What is it that we're really trying to accomplish when we say we want to build an effective organization? So here's something for you to think about, and I'm hoping that this provokes something more for you from your own work life that gets you thinking about building effective organizations in a slightly different way or from a different perspective. What I'm suggesting, and this comes from personal experience, so the practitioner side of my background with the theoretical side, the research I've conducted over the years in different ways and across different questions, that what people were really trying to do is gauge how to make organizations work better. Sounds simple. For your mission, your bottom line, however that's defined. It could be a nonprofit service mission, could be products, whatever that is, it's defined. And this is the crux of the matter, and how to make organizations work better for the people in it. That your organization is humane, it's easy to understand. And this to me is what makes Fielding quite distinctive in terms of the way that we think about how we create our educational environment and experience. And that is, this is a puzzle. The puzzle of human development enmeshed in a context of organizational life. And it's that intersection where the most interesting questions happen from a scholarly perspective. So if you were in this room, you were interested in becoming a scholar. You want to have a PhD, you want to earn that. It's a big intellectual commitment, it's a financial commitment, it's a family commitment. But somewhere in your heart, you really want to become a scholar, and it's that scholar practitioner. And this is the essence of understanding. How do we ask the kinds of questions, the big, complex questions that help us understand more fully that connection between the human part of an organization and those outcomes of an organization? And when you peel back all the different frameworks you might use in your professional life, all the different metrics, all the different ways you track, all of those things, whether you're using RACI models or whether you're doing personality tests, whatever they are, it all comes down to this question. These two elements and how they intersect. And that sounds simple, and that is also very difficult. And that's what scholarship can do to inform practice. And that's where, to me, the most exciting work happens in research in contemporary life, because we are trying to build organizations that are more effective, but not just more effective, but are successful over that long term. So I look to my background, as people do. You tend to lean on the things that you know and the things that you've experienced. And to me, another interesting way to see this is to think about organizations, systems, societies, et cetera, as a kind of ecosystem. And think about that framework and what that would mean if you took a framework of ecological health and ecological systems and applied it to organizational functioning. So for example, some of you probably have a science background, or you may even be biologists or botanists in the room. You know what ecosystem health means. Ecosystems are healthy, and what that means is they can perpetuate themselves indefinitely. Doesn't mean they're static. We used to think that, but that's not true at all. It's that they're constantly changing, but they have this sort of self-working mechanism because they create conducive conditions for the survival of the life forms in the system. So when things get out of balance, there's a give and take, and things come back into a kind of equilibrium, although that equilibrium is always changing. That's a self-perpetuation. And in ecological theory and in systems functioning, we talk about 4 pillars. And to me, this would be an interesting conversation to have as part of a seminar at Fielding, and the kinds of conversations that we try to aim for, something that's thought-provoking, something that causes us to question and challenge assumptions, to ask good questions, to think about the literature, to try to push our thinking just a little bit more. So if you think about ecological systems, they're healthy when they're adaptable, they're diverse, they're resilient, and when they have dynamic tension. So let's take each one of these in turn for a moment. So adaptability is similar to resilience, but adaptability in an ecosystem tends to be short-term. Something happens, the system responds. The ecology responds. Could be a storm, could be something, some change, external condition, and there's a short-term response. That's adaptability, and the ability, the speed with which an ecosystem can do that shows that it's an adaptable system. Diverse. We know that the interconnection of the different elements of an ecosystem, plant species, animal species, et cetera, that interconnection between them, the more different kinds of flora and fauna in a system, the healthier it tends to be, because it's not reliant on one key element, or not vulnerable if one key element gets removed from that system. For example, we've learned this through industrial agriculture, that monocultures are, because they're not diverse, they tend to be vulnerable and they're fragile. Resilience is the longer game. It's adaptability in the long view, right? It's the ability, think about in what resilience is in your own life, the ability to take previous experience and build the kind of healthy conditions so that when something happens, you have a plan, you're prepared. That's the kind of ecological resilience that you can see in a system. So the old systems, oh, excuse me, I think I pressed my PowerPoint. The long game is resilience and ecology.
I believe Dr. Rogers is frozen for a moment.
Just for a moment, it looks like. So we will await her unfreezing, and we will await her return to kind of dynamic tension.
We will adapt for the moment.
Looks like she is not gone, but not here. An interesting VUCA moment.
Looks like she might have hopped off to rejoin.
She'll come back.
Oh, here she is.
Hello, Katrina, you are back.
Hi, everyone. Are we all back?
We're just talking about VUCA-ness in the world and in this room. Now you are returned.
Exactly. I thought I lost you all. Glad to see you. I am returned. Just be patient. Everyone will come back together. My apologies for that. Sometimes connectivity in the world is not always reliable. So how far had I gotten, Caroline?
I believe we were just about here.
Yep, you
Okay. I had just finished
just talked
talking
about
about ecological health.
indeed.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. I'm going to go off video myself just to see if that helps. So hang on just a moment, everyone, but you can still hear me, and I'll expect Patrice to give me a high sign. So in a similar way, think about how organizations could be like ecological systems. So we're adaptable. The organizational equivalent would be that short-term preparedness. We're diverse. That would be diversity plus range. So I argue that in the case of organizations, it's about an expansiveness in thinking. It could be responsiveness is resilience. And then, of course, you have dynamic tension, which in the case of organizations would be more about being able to cope with paradox, complexity, and nuance. So these two pictures are about health, right? Human health, organizational health. So this, in an organization, if you could actually measure, rather than measure transactional kinds of outcomes, measure things like adaptability and diversity and resilience and tension, dynamic tension, as it relates to how we actually cope with paradox, that is not categorical thinking, but rather nuanced thinking, complexity, systemic ways of thinking about things. You can then measure organizational health and effectiveness. You could build organizations based on this framework. But in addition to that, because while ecological health is an interesting way to think about organizational functioning, there are also things that are singular to human endeavors. So I suggest here that that includes consistency and trustworthiness. That these are things that come up in the literature. I'm going to go back to video and hope this works. These are items that come up in the research quite a bit. And I think Patrice, who is in her own right a substantial scholar and researcher, would agree. And Patrice also runs the ODC section for the Academy of Management, which is an internationally recognized gold standard organization for management research and scholarship. That this comes up in the literature a lot. An organization, in order to be these two conditions go together. An organization, in order to be trustworthy, has to be consistent, and consistency is what also gives rise to trustworthiness. So it's an iterative process. So if you think about building effective organizations, preparedness, responsiveness, diversity, holding tension, complexity, paradox, that's the shorthand, consistency and trustworthiness, and measure those, then you're on your way to a framework that allows you to be the kind of leader that has this longer view, but also that deeper perspective. And these are the kinds of questions, these are the kinds of conditions, the frameworks that you would be exposed to at Fielding, that you could bring to the table your own experience and say, well, Dr. Rogers, that doesn't make sense, because in my experience, this is what I know, or in my research, or in my work, or this is the question I want to ask that's even bigger than this. So that's just the taste of the kinds of things that you could learn at Fielding. What I would say ultimately is that when I think about the path to certainty, because we imply we're building on effective organizations in times of uncertainty, there's never been a generation who doesn't believe that they don't live in times of uncertainty. All generations believe that. And it's not to expect conditions to be certain, because that won't happen, but to build your organizations in ways to meet whatever comes down that road, and whatever comes down that path. So I will stop and leave you to be thinking about that. As I said, if this were a seminar, this is when we would kick off the dialogue. I'm going to look to Caroline and Patrice to help us, but I also want to acknowledge Marie and to see if Marie, if you would like to say anything as we sort of regroup here. I'll stop sharing so we can see the gallery. And for those of you who could be on video, please do. And of course, if you have any questions, please let me know. And I will put my email in the chat if you would like to chat with me one-on-one sometime. I'm happy to take phone calls and meetings and just learn more about you as well. So with that, Marie, I'll ask you if there's anything you'd like to say.
Why, thank you, Dr. Rogers. I've been taking notes. I always learn so much when you present and you share with us. You said a couple of things that just struck me as so importantly, and one of them is that the dialogue that happens around topics like this at Fielding are co-constructed in relationships. Like you just did a remarkable thing. You invited people to challenge your ideas and to bring their own ideas. And I think it's so remarkable that new knowledge is created in that kind of a community where there's a trusted space where people can share and bring their expertise and challenge and grow together. That it just struck me as something, and also to note that you're a world expert in the topic of sustainability, and Dr. Rosenthal is an expert in the study of leadership. So, you know, you bring this long and distinguished career to the conversation, and yet you still maintain that invitation for dialogue. So it just struck me as being creating a learning ecosystem that is generative, and that's very exciting.
Thank you, Marie. Well, and I think that one of the things I like about Fielding, and had I known about Fielding when I was looking at graduate schools, I would have gone to Fielding, is that I appreciate that we think of each other as colleagues, that we're all learning, and obviously we're differentiated by roles and experience and training and so on, but that at the same time, the very fact that we'll say to your student colleagues, your faculty colleagues, it's a respect for everyone's learning, wherever they may be in their pathway to education, in their educational advancement. We all have something to bring to the table. And to me, that's, I know I said this intersection of human organization development is very exciting, but also to me, so is that adult learning. I don't know of any other institution where that's all that they're devoted to. And it's unusual to have a graduate school that is completely devoted to graduate learning. Most graduate schools are tacked on to an undergraduate mission. And there are a few, like Fielding, but not many. So first, I'd like to just say, if there are any questions, you can put them in the chat. If there are any comments you'd like to make, as I said, I put my email in. I'm happy to answer any questions or talk to you privately about your own work and what you're interested in learning. Also, if there was anything else you'd like to say, Patrice, at this time.
Right. I'm keen to hear from those who are here. You know, again, in Fielding, we are all about the connection between practice and theory, the connection between practice and research. So I don't know the kind of work in the world that the folks who are on this call are doing. So some of you may be coming from an academic perspective, probably more from a professional perspective. I just love to hear any kind of reactions. It's Katrina's comments and the way that she is kind of constructing the world and organizations. Does it resonate with you? Are there questions that you have, or just reactions? Is it resonant? Just as people are maybe kind of thinking of anything to share. In a way, this is what a course seminar might be like. So if you're on the doctoral program in Fielding, you'd be in a series of what we call Moodle courses, group courses. We would all be in a course. Katrina would be the facilitator, Katrina and Marie. We would have done some reading before on a particular topic before we came together. Either Katrina would have given a presentation, or maybe one of us would have been tasked with giving a short presentation as students, and then we would open it up for reactions and for conversation.
Yeah, and while everyone's processing, and of course, I understand that too, people are often, on these calls, people are often taking a break for a few minutes to listen. So I also would say that one of the things that I've appreciated about Fielding that keeps me at Fielding, keeps me passionate, committed to the education is, I mentioned the first is the interdisciplinarity around that intersection of human and organization development. You can bring in lots of different concepts and ideas from other disciplines. And most doctoral education is very hyper specific. And there's good reason for that, but it's resulted in highly specialized kinds of education. So think about it. If you're going to get a doctorate in anthropology, you go into a department where you're one of 8 students, and that's what you do, and you're probably going to teach it. It's a very hyper specialization. Whereas at Fielding, we tend to attract students that love to ask big, complicated questions that cross lots of disciplines. So my idea, it may not resonate with you about the way ecology might connect to organizations, but it's an example of the kinds of creative thinking where we give ourselves permission to, that we try to create the kind of curiosities like, well, what if we applied it in this way? Maybe it works, maybe it doesn't. What if we go out there and test it, and then we'll see if this works or not. So I think those are really, to me, it's as important to set that tone as it is to know what, quote, the answer might be. Maybe a good idea, may not be, but the point is that we're all in this learning environment together, and that we're collaborating with each other, sharing, testing, being critical, being constructive, being appreciative, because we're all scholars trying to make our way in the world and understand something that's quite complicated, which is the way that human beings move in the world and create societies and organizations, and how we're making the modern world every day that we live it. I see a couple people come up, and Len, you went off mute. So
I did, Dr. Rogers. I'm going to attempt to respond to Dr. Rosenthal's invitation for comments and reflecting on the presentation and the discussion. And I'm not enrolled in Fielding yet. But I found today's discussion and many of the other discussions I've signed on for to be very encouraging. I mean, it's interactive. I liked the example of the ecosystem. For me, it made it easy to understand the complex concepts that you're introducing, but in a way that they make sense and they tie together nicely. So I find it encouraging that I continue to consider enrolling in or applying to for the school for a PhD program. And I thank you for that. I really like the interactions across the participants. Today it's been a little bit more subdued than on some of the other calls, but I can see, just looking in the eyes, there's a lot going on in behind the scenes. So I just wanted to say thank you, but also to share my thoughts.
Well, thank you, Len. And it's good to take your time in thinking about a doctorate. It's a big deal, frankly, and it's not for everyone in particular. But I believe that people who have a commitment, have a desire, and anyone can meet the challenge. And because I've seen it, I've seen many different kinds of people come through Fielding with different backgrounds, different expectations, different ways of thinking and knowing, and I really believe in the possibility of how education can also be unanticipated, a transformational experience. You know, you always want to know that you have a competency, that you learn things that are important,
Right.
but you always hope that maybe it's going to be even more than that. And my
Yeah.
experience of fielding is it often is.
Yeah. I love that unanticipated transformational experience. That will resonate with me for the rest of the day. And it's true. I mean, for me, in my heart, becoming, if you will, a scholarly practitioner is what I want. And on each one of these calls,
Yes.
when I listen or participate, I feel more and more of a pull, if you will. So thank you for being so inspirational, Dr. Rogers.
My pleasure. And I just want to also, and thank you for, it's sometimes hard to speak out on these calls, so I appreciate that, putting yourself out there. And Indira's, thank you for your concept. I used to teach at community college level, and
Mhm.
you are exactly right. If you think of students as co-learners, and you're an instructor, as I was, you know what that takes to try to set, language matters, and setting a
Yeah.
tone in a learning environment of of creating the conditions so people can feel empowered by their own learning. So that
Mhm.
ultimately people have to activate themselves, but there's a lot you can do to set the table in a
Right.
way that is, the way that is allows people to really come into their best potential, which is what you always hope for as an educator. So, Indira, thank you for adding that to the chat. Brian, you have a question.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you, Dr. Rogers, for the presentation. I think Len saw my my cylinders firing in my brain on different levels. I really felt like you read my mind there, Len. I did have a specific question. You mentioned measuring things like paradox and complexity, and those sound like very complicated things to measure. Um, could you give a little more insight on how organizations might look at those things and attempt to measure them?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Thank you for asking, because I've thought a lot about this. So the example that I use is some research that I recently conducted about sustainability and measuring sustainability concepts in the classroom. So how does a teacher know if their students are really taking up these concepts? That's a kind of it's an effectiveness question, basically. How do they know that they're learning? And so can you measure that? And if you can figure out a way to measure that, but to me the parallel is you can then measure complicated concepts. If you can measure sustainability uptake, you can measure things like adaptability, resilience, and the degree to which you see dynamic tension in play, the degree in which you see consistency and trustworthiness, and I want to make sure, and resilience. So here's some ways to think about it in organizational life. And some of it's not that complicated, because what you do notice is that in organizations that evidence these 6 traits: adaptability, resilience, diversity, dynamic tension, consistency, and trustworthiness, what you see are people in the system who are systemic thinkers. You can measure that. That is, people who see interconnectedness. You can measure that. That's not, there are tests for that. They're actually, they're regularized tests for such things, interconnectedness. You can measure trust in organizations. You can measure responsiveness in organizations. You can measure preparedness. And so there are already tools that we can use, but in my mind, it's not about it's not about inventing new things. It's about taking existing tools, but thinking about them in new ways, so that we're not just saying, well, the turnover was good this year, but bad last year, but here's why, and we're going to do this. That's important. I'm not saying that isn't, but it's not sufficient. It's necessary, but not sufficient. The next question is, so how is the organization adapting from year to year on a particular thing? And you can measure that piece. And, if you wanted, Brian, I'd happy to send you some examples of that. But I think you can measure that. Caroline, Nene said there's no sound. She can't hear anything or anyone. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear
Yes.
you.
Yes.
It might be her speaker, but I'm responding in the chat. We will be sharing the recording, so if there's any portion you missed, you'll be able to watch it
Okay.
back.
I think
Great.
that
You can all see me frozen up.
when you think about when you think about the connection between practice and scholarship, I love Brian's question. One thing that scholarship and I think academia can bring to practice, and I remember kind of resisting it. I entered a doctoral program when after I'd been a manager for a long period of time, and loved a lot that I learned at the beginning, and kind of had a resistance to others, that it was, kind of endless circular thought. When are you going to get on and do something? So, some of you may possibly be having that kind of reaction. But I think the idea of clear conceptualization, clear definition of terms that we use on a day-to-day basis that are powerful terms, widely used, and if someone asks you what you meant by it, how you define it, you may be frozen in time, as Katrina was momentarily, because we use terms a lot and realize maybe in long conversations that we're not actually talking about the same thing. One of my favorite definitions and also measures is one of trust in organizations. We talk about trust and we think about trust, but maybe we don't really think about what we mean by trust. And there's a kind of classic definition and measure by two people, Cook and Wall, decades and decades ago, that indicate that trust in organizations has two key dimensions. So it's not one thing, it's two key dimensions are in this construct. If I trust you in an organization, there are two things going on. One is that I have belief in your competence to do what you say you're going to do. So if I trust you, part of it is a trust in your competence. But that's not all. There's another dimension of trust, which is that I trust that you are not going to try to use guile against me, that your intentions towards me are benevolent, that you're not going to try to do me down in some kind of way. But when I read the Cook and Wall definition, and then I saw the way that they had developed a measure of that's been widely used, and there's a lot of measures of trust, and I don't think any of them are as good as Cook and Wall. You might look it up. A real clarity came into my mind about how to see an organization systematically. If you can see it clearly and systematically, and you can measure concepts, you can act on them in some way to make things better, and you can confirm that you've done so or that you've not done so, and you need to figure out another way forward. So a lot of the research that's done by students pursuing a doctorate in HOD, a lot of it is qualitative research, kind of process-oriented research. Some of it is quantitative. So some of it is actually collecting data that has numbers in some way attached to it, often attitude surveys. So you might go into an organization and measure the level of trust that's around. You might then yourself, or you might watch somebody else seeking to intervene in that organization in some way through a coaching intervention, through an intervention with middle managers, or a large systems approach to change. And if you were interested in trust at systems level, maybe more often at team level, because it's easier to intervene, you might utilize this definition of trust and this measure of trust and know something meaningful about whether or not your intervention had worked, or whether you need to try something different. So there are all sorts of different types of research, but I love Katrina's kind of emphasis on the concept, what we mean by these terms, and then how you might measure them. It's a really powerful thing for an agent of change, whoever that might be, a leader, a consultant, a coach, to have in their toolkit, be able to see organizations clearly, know what we mean when we're using terms, and even be able to measure the level of those phenomena in organization. I love that Cook and Wall, organizational trust. Check it out. I'll put it in the chat.
Thank you, Patrice. Ryan, does that start getting towards what you're thinking about? I mean, what your
Yeah,
question?
yeah, it does. Thank you so much both for your answers, and yeah, I'm excited to look more into it.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I think this is a really key question, because the other piece of it to me is this human question, which is how people experience an organization tells us a lot about the organization, but it only tells us a certain amount about the organization. So how do you factor in all the ways in which there's variability in humans and their perspectives? And I think, to me, that's another element. And I think, Patrice, that comes up in the trust literature. What I may be trusting because I extend trust, but you may not be. So how do you then think about that in organizational life? I might have lost you there, Patrice. I'm not sure.
I am here. I'm keen whether anybody in the room might have a thought. This difference between our perceptions of organizations, kind of knowing how employees are seeing organizations, and then another way of thinking about reality, which would perhaps be measurable. So it's where Katrina started, a notion kind of profit seeking, and then the human side of enterprise.
Mm. I'm just checking the chat, see if there's anything else. Marie. Yeah, I don't see anything else yet in the chat. I just wondered, Marie, if you had any thoughts about measurement in your experience.
Yes. In my work, I had to wrestle with the definition of one of those terms that has become ubiquitous, and that is resilient. And I wanted to,
Mhm.
I was interested in organizational change because I was involved in change issues and change projects and quality improvement and Six Sigma. And we kept running into barriers. And I realized we were not considering the human Sigma, the diversity and impact of human people response to change. And I began to think about resilience as one of those things that might unlock that mystery for me. But boy, there's a lot of different ways to think of resilience. So for me, I synthesized definitions to be so that I was looking at how can we create collective resilience by looking at the experience that people in an organization have together that could put the capacity to deal with change, especially unexpected change, in the bank. Like, my question was, what beliefs and behaviors would we reinforce in an organization if we wanted to increase collective resilience? So the resilience was this bank of experience that people developed as they worked together that would give them, and I said it was beliefs and behaviors, that when they face the next thing, they could actually tap into that bank of collective resilience. So it was quite an interesting journey. And I did try to figure out a way that you could actually measure whether those beliefs and behaviors were, how present they were. So you had like a starting point, and then you could think about your strategy. So your discussion has made me think about that all again and get excited about it. So thank you for asking me.
I think, again, kind of one of the things that's going on in this conversation that I appreciate is just kind of posing very, very broadly two different ways of doing research in organizations. or doing research on teams, or doing research about a particular kind of collection of individual people. And so there are two broad ways. We've talked about measurement a lot. You know, we've talked about measuring something and then intervening in a system, and then kind of going back in Marie's example to see whether or not, you know, resilience maybe by a certain way of measurement has increased. So we've talked a lot about measurement, and it's important, and that would be kind of part and parcel of the scholarly literature on organization development and change, or in human development, or on coaching, or on education, whatever kind of degrees might be present. There's another way to do research on these issues, and I would say, will say, that it's the one that is kind of actually more prominent in the HOD program for various kinds of reasons, and that's qualitative research. So you might be interested in trust in organizations, and you might go in with a specific kind of question, maybe even a hypothesis and a way of measuring trust. You might be interested in trust in teams. I'm thinking of some of the topics that I have had the pleasure of working with students around. One question about trust might be people in the millennial generation or in Generation Z. What do they look for to decide whether they do trust a new leader? So what are kind of the early signals that a leader might send? How are those received? Maybe particularly in terms of generations within workplaces. I think about the notion that has always been really interesting to me, the idea of swift trust, which is a kind of term in use in military context, that you can achieve swift trust because people trust that individuals are in particular roles and they've had training. They don't have to have long knowledge of those individuals because they trust the role definition and they trust the training. And so you can think about trust signals, you can think about trust and how it shows up or not in particular kind of context. And you can seek that understanding through qualitative means. You're not trying to measure things, you're not working with numbers. Rather, you're trying to access the individual experience and perspective on the issue, or the group experience or perspective. And you might do that through individual interviews. You might do it through group interviews. You might do it through something that we call action research, where you're both a researcher and also an actor within a community, and you see yourself in this action research as co-researchers with the people in the system that you're working with. And so there are all sorts of fantastic ways of coming to clarity about organizations and how they operate and how they might operate more positively and more effectively for the individuals within them and for those of us who access their services and their goods. So quantitative, qualitative. In HOD, both are going on. We tend towards a more process orientation, a more qualitative orientation, accessing perceptions of the world through interviews and other types of data collection.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, because most of the studies, for those of you who go on to doctoral work at Fielding, are likely to be qualitative, thematic kinds of data collection, which our faculty are expert in as well. And it's if you want to dig deep into those humanistic frames, and Fielding is a really great match for that, which is inquiring about the experience that people have, how they make meaning of those experiences. That's all such an important component of qualitative research, which is a different kind of data gathering, let's say quantitative. Although we do have students, of course, that do both, that do mixed methods as well as quantitative. I just want to say before the top of the hour, because I know you all have to leave, and I really appreciate you spending the entire hour with us, that Jen Green made the point that the interactions between all these things and different power dynamics has really varied for her, for you, through different organizations. And I would agree. I mean, the same for me. That's been my experience as well. But you brought up something really important. And a former student, now graduate of Fielding, and I just wrote an article on the concept of power and leadership. And because we're making the argument that there's a gap in the literature, how we think about, and that just means in the research, about how we think about the relationship of power to all these other concepts. And if you're interested, Caroline, I know you're going to send a short video, which I have, and if you thought that people would want to see it, I'll send that essay as well, because it's also a really good example of collaboration between a faculty colleague and a student, now alum colleague, that might be of interest to many of you, because for those of us living organizational lives, we see the day-to-day reality of how we fail to meet the measure of building effective and humane organizations. So thank you, and thank you all. And we're at 2 minutes to the top of the hour. So Patrice, did you have any last words?
Only to thank everyone for
For
coming.
this call, that is.
Draw your attention to each of us. Katrina and Marie and I have put our email there in the chat, and we welcome any kind of reach out. So happy to learn about your interests. So happy to answer any questions you might have about the PhD programs, human development, organization development, and change. It's been wonderful to spend this hour with you. Thank you so much for coming.
It has. Yeah, thank you, Patrice. Thank you, Caroline, and for you and your team, and Brian and others to set it up, and Ignacio and those that are seen and unseen on this call, but I know make everything happen and happen well. And I appreciate all of you, the patience with any of our slight technical difficulties. I think we overcame them nicely. And again, feel free to reach out. You can always just type my name in Google. I come up next, I think, to an Irish folk singer, but my email is good. Rogers@fielding.edu. Very easy to remember.
I also put our
Thank you.
admissions email address in the chat and just wanted to thank you all on behalf of the admissions team for spending this last hour with us. A few of you joining us previously today for our evidence-based coaching certificate information session. It's wonderful to spend all this time with you today. If anyone wants to join us at 3 p.m., we also have a PhD in Human Development and PhD in Organizational Development and Change information session hosted by Patrice. So if you want to spend more time with us, you have that opportunity. I'll put the events calendar in the chat here, and welcome one-on-one calls as well. You can send us an email at admissions@fielding.edu to coordinate a one-on-one call with any of the admissions advisors. Looking forward to continuing our conversation and hope you all have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you, Caroline. Thanks, everyone. Take care now. Bye-bye.